Let's go to our guest line. It is Monday. Paulie's spoken into existence, and Mike is probably regretting the fact that he said yes to this, but we're pleased to be joined by Mike McAllister every Monday here on Orange Nation. Mike, great to have you on. How was the weekend?
It was good, full of house projects and things not going the way you expect them to, but otherwise it was good.
All right, you and Paulie both had very productive weekends. All right, let's start with the news of these two class of 2026 commits that have decommitted. Can you bring us up to date on this situation and kind of what went down with both of these players?
Yeah, both of them committed early to Syracuse, and I think when they committed to Syracuse, it was a bit of a surprise to many. But both kind of have also strongly hinted at the fact that staying in their home state was important to them. So ultimately, when the in-state offers that they were originally looking for came in, they decommitted from Syracuse. One of them committed to Florida, where Demetrius Samuel, he was actually a Florida legacy, so he's got family that's played there before, so that kind of always seemed like a sure thing. And Isaiah Williams, he told me specifically, I ultimately decided I wanted to stay in Florida. So, perhaps at the time when he committed wasn't 100% at that point, became 100% at that point, and decided to decommit and release a top three, which is the three big in-state schools, Florida State, Florida, and Miami. So ultimately it happens when you recruit elite-level players. That's going to happen, and big schools aren't going to back off just because they committed to Fran Brown. And ultimately I think it created some buzz, which was good for Syracuse and Fran Brown at the time, and you've still got more than a year to fill in those spots in your 2026 class.
You say it created a good buzz, Mike, but does the PR of losing them hurt?
No, because, see, when they first committed, almost nobody, national recruiting analysts, experts, et cetera, expected that they were going to end up sticking with and signing with Syracuse. But it got all of those same people talking about Syracuse a lot more than they otherwise would have. And when the initial top 10 recruiting classes very early in the 2026 class popped up on every single major recruiting site, Syracuse was listed somewhere on there every single time because they were one of the only schools that had two players ranked just outside of or within the top 100 in the 2026 class. So that got them a lot of attention for several months, and there are other recruits that will notice that and say, oh, maybe I do need to take a more serious look at Syracuse, whereas the fact that they decommit, I don't think is going to hinder that interest that you may have garnered from some of those other recruits.
Do you see a day the verbal commitment goes away completely? It seems silly to me.
It is. It's been silly. It's only going to get worse. But no, I don't, because how many times do we see these verbal commitment announcements where you've got the hat on the table and you get the graphics on social media and, you get to do the whole press conference thing or television thing or Instagram Live thing where you say you've got NC State, Penn State, and Syracuse as your three hats, and I'm going to pick one and pick up the Penn State hat and then throw the NC State hat on to be like, haha, just kidding. Those types of things people love to do. The kids still love to do it. It gets a ton of coverage from media outlets, a ton of clicks from fans. That's not going away anytime soon.
But couldn't you just make it, hey, we're signing our letter of intent when we do that, instead of having this whole weird process where they say schools and then a week later they're going somewhere else?
You could, but then you also lose out. There's a couple of things there. You lose out on the vast majority of players that make a verbal commitment, stick with that verbal commitment. It's a very high percentage. The ones that do not, obviously that's what we're talking about here, and you get I don't care if they verbally commit, let me know when they sign, and I get that. But how many times do you hear cases where you've got a recruit that verbally commits early in a class and then they're helping that school recruit other players? You lose that ability if you get away from verbal commitments entirely and strictly focus on signing in terms of some sort of public announcement. Because the reality is, if a player wants to verbally commit, they're going to verbally commit. But if you're not allowed to announce some sort of verbal commitment, they sort of keep that to themselves. And then those covering recruiting saying, well, this guy's helping such and such a school, so it's like he's committed there, but we're not allowed to use that word. So I don't think that the verbal commitment's ever going to go away.
One more follow-up on this. Is it something coaches like? Like, do coaches push for the early verbal commitment, or, does it not really matter to them because, as Paulie's saying, I mean, they change their mind so much?
Well, everyone has a different approach, so every coach approaches things differently. There are some schools that, hey, when you verbally commit, if you decide you're going to try to take other visits anyway, I'm going to pull your scholarship. I'm not letting you take visits elsewhere. Some will do that for some recruits, but if you're an elite level recruit where it's like, I'm Syracuse, I got a 5-star quarterback looking at me, I'm going to let him do whatever he wants. I'm not going to pull his scholarship. So there's some leeway there. There's some different approaches, but largely, I think coaches understand when they get an early commitment in the 2026 class or a future recruiting class, especially from an elite level prospect that's out of state, that other schools are not going to stop recruiting them. And so that recruit has a higher flip chance than someone who commits, perhaps a few months later and is much closer to your school than what that recruit is. Coaches know when they accept a verbal commitment what that means, what the probability is that player is going to actually sign with them.
All right, let's talk about these current SU players as they get ready for the season ahead. We move on to, the first full week of camp now. I know it's early, Mike, but any takeaways from either anything you've seen during the first, 30 minutes of practices or anything you've heard during the player/coach interviews after practice?
Yeah, the messaging seems to be pretty consistent among offensive players, defensive players, coaches. So they're clearly all together and on the same page. That seems to be abundantly clear to me. I think they look like a bigger, stronger, faster group overall than what they've had the last few years. So I think that's good. That means you've had success with the strength and conditioning program. You've had success with the players that you've brought in and the development of the players that have come back. So there's a lot of positives to glean from that. And, we're still trying to figure out exactly what the schemes are. And they're clearly not telling us. It's been asked of assistant coaches, Coach Brown, et cetera, what the specific schemes are that they're going to be rolling out there when they play Ohio. And they're keeping that as close to the vest as possible. So we're getting absolutely nothing from that perspective. I think the answer we keep getting in terms of the offensive system is whatever the other team can't stop. So we'll see exactly what that looks like, but they're keeping that close to the vest as well still. But I think overall it's been pretty positive.
We talked about last week the point spread for the opener against Ohio. I think, Paulie and I and everybody, I'm sure you are anxious as well to see this team in action and watch this first game. We've seen the point spread as high as 17.5 against Ohio. Does that seem like too much to you? Does it seem about right? Does it seem like not enough? What do you make of the point spread?
I think if I had to bet that right now, I would certainly bet that Syracuse would cover that spread and then some. I think it's a combination of two things. First, I do think that there is a level of respect for the talent that Syracuse has brought in. And I also think that Ohio, when you look at, they had a really good year last year, but a lot of their best players have left either from graduation or they were picked over pretty good in the transfer portal as well. So they're kind of a shell of the team that they were last year. They're not rolling out the same caliber of team in Ohio that, won a bunch of games last year and went to the postseason and all of that. So I think there's a combination of both of those things, expecting that Ohio is going to take a step back because of the talent that they've lost, and then expecting Syracuse to take a step forward because of the talent they've added.
The coaches poll is out, just released. Syracuse plays two teams, or I guess at this point, two teams on the poll. Miami 19, NC State 22nd. Looks like Clemson is 14th, and Florida State is 10th. Does that sound right to you? I mean, those are the top four teams in your mind in the ACC?
I think so. Now, the one, I think, team that has a chance to sort of crack that and get into the top 25, if we're talking about outside of Syracuse, is I think Virginia Tech has a chance that by the time they're coming to the Dome later in the season, I have a feeling that there's a pretty good chance they could end up being a ranked team when Syracuse plays them. And there's a possibility, based on the way that some of these Miami teams have been over the last several years, that perhaps the season will not have gone as well as they hoped, and they might not be ranked by the time they come to the Dome to play Syracuse. So I think ultimately that's going to change a little bit between now and when Syracuse faces some of those teams. But Virginia Tech is the team I'm looking at in terms of Syracuse's schedule that's got a chance to move into the rankings. And I think SMU might be a little bit of a dark horse for that as well. They're better, I think, than what a lot of people expect.
Let's talk some basketball as long as we have you. I saw Sadiq White is transferring to IMG for his senior season. What's the significance of that?
The significance is Syracuse has a really strong relationship with the coaches and with the program at IMG. They clearly feel comfortable sending their players there. And so this tells me that Sadiq White was working or at least communicating with the Syracuse coaches in terms of, hey, if I want to go somewhere to work on my development, play better competition, where's a good spot to go? And that's where he ends up, a place that Syracuse has sent players in the past. Donnie Freeman went there just last year in Coach Red's first recruiting class. Benny Williams has gone there before. Justin Taylor and Quiddier Copeland have gone to IMG Academy in the past. So it's clearly a program, a school that Syracuse feels very comfortable with, and there's a level of trust between both sides there. And the fact that if Sadiq White is going to transfer, he's transferring there. I think if you're a Syracuse fan, you look at this and say, does this mean he's looking for bigger offers? Well, no, his profile was already extremely high. He was already a 5-star recruit when he committed to Syracuse, so he's not going to try to up his profile. This is strictly a developmental thing and tells me that the communication between him, his camp, and Syracuse is as strong as ever.
Yeah, Jesse Edwards, another IMG Academy, going back here a little bit. So you're right. They've got a great relationship with IMG. Anything else basketball-wise, basketball recruiting-wise that you want to get across to our listeners today?
Nothing too critical. I know Kyan Anthony's always the top guy that everyone talks about, but there's nothing really new there. Syracuse still involved with a bunch of high-profile prospects, but been pretty quiet. I know Caden Lewis, a 4-star point guard from the D.C. area, took an unofficial visit this past towards the end of this week into the weekend, last week that is. So he's someone Syracuse is certainly recruiting very hard. Syracuse is in his top 6. He's visiting Duke. I believe that visit starts today, but those are unofficials, and he's still looking to take official visits to all the schools in his top 6 later on as well, so it's possible he returns to Central New York.
All right, Mike. Great stuff as always. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate it. We'll do it again next Monday.
Thanks, guys. Sounds good.
All right, Mike McAllister. Actually, we won't because we're going to be off next Monday. 2 weeks from now, we will be on with Mike McAllister. I realized, as the words came out of my mouth, I realized that it will not be next week.
Steve, we got to hit on something. The coaches poll came out in the past hour.
Yes. I did mention that to Mike. So, yeah.
Did you see it all?
Yeah, we touched on it there, but we can. Yeah,
I was reading it.
Yeah, that's fine. We can talk more about it.
Is the schedule easier? Is it? UNLV's ahead of Syracuse. Easier schedule.
And that's an away game too. Again, yes, it is easier than it is less difficult than last year, than the last several years, but it's not.
Does it make it easier if you're an underdog?
Make it easy. If you're an underdog,
you're less of an underdog.
Yes.
That doesn't make it easier to me. That still means you're an underdog.
It's less difficult.
The schedule is easier if you are not tossy-uppy and you're going to win. That's easier.
It's not as difficult if you are less of an underdog. Yes. Let's take a timeout. We'll wrap up hour number 1 next on ESPN Radio.